Hey, my name is Tim Charles. I play violin and sing for Ne Obliviscaris. Yeah, it's long.
It is long.
Yeah, it's about 22 hours of actual flying, plus the layovers and getting to and from the airport. So it's pretty long, but it's of course worth it because it's wonderful to be here and we're very excited. This flight, I was watching a docuseries or a show on on Wim Hof, and then another one on like meditation. And so I was, I guess, trying to maybe not think too much about like the band stuff. Otherwise, I always find, as just a random fact, I always find that I listen to a lot of Alcest on flights for some reason. It's just like their music seems to fit the vibe.
Very relaxing music as well.
Yeah, I'll put on like their whole discography and just go through the whole thing over several hours because you have like so many hours. About 2020 during the pandemic, it was something that I had actually tried it quite a few years ago, maybe 2017, 18, and I chickened out as soon as it started to get cold weather. Whereas in 2020, I actually started it on the first day of winter in Australia. I was just looking for something to, I guess, help with my own personal well-being. And I had kind of quit earlier because I found it uncomfortable. And I got to a point where I thought, well, maybe I should be just doing things if they're good for me. I should just be doing them even if they're uncomfortable for like the greater good of myself as a person. And yeah, so that was kind of part of that adventure and delving into different things in my life. So right now we're really excited because the show's tomorrow, and just minutes ago, we finished our third day of rehearsals here in Helsinki, and things are sounding great. It's the first time playing with new drummer Kevin Paradis from France. And then, just on a week's notice, we managed to get James Dorton across from the US. And so we had no idea what was achievable to learn in such a short amount of time. And we've just really been blown away by just how quickly he's come to the material and just how dedicated and hardworking he's been done. And the work that he's put in to really try and do the songs justice and Zen's parts justice. So the last couple of weeks have been incredibly stressful because, of course, there was a period where we thought that maybe Zen might not be coming and we had no feeling organized. And so that feels a bit like imminent disaster when we were in that scenario. But to be able to have James come through and help us out to do this tour, and then to put so much work into it and to be doing so well so quickly is really heartening because, everyone just wants to hear the songs that they love. Like that's why they've bought a ticket to our show, presumably. And so we just want to make sure they get done justice by the people up on stage. And when you have a late change like that, it's trying to make sure that you're still staying true to those compositions and what you've written. And I think we're going to be able to do that, which is really exciting. So tomorrow will be the first chance to perform the new songs from our album Exul. And I think it's going to be great. And so I'm sure it'll just keep getting better as the tour goes on, which will be really exciting. Thankfully, it was always the plan because we had, we're an Australian band, but on this tour, Matt and I are the only two Australians on the tour because, when Benji lived in Australia for a long time, but he moved back to France 5 or 6 years ago. And then when we got new bassist in 2017, we got Martino Garatoni, who's Italian. And then we just got a new drummer, and he's from France. And then because we have that scenario where the band is split across multiple countries anyway, we can't really rehearse. So I had actually not seen Martino and Benji in the flesh, in person, since we last played shows, which was the end of June 2019. And so just seeing them at the airport, when Tino, he was the first one that I saw, that was a big hug because we hadn't seen each other in almost 4 years. So we were like, okay, well, we need at least 3 days rehearsal. And then the expectation is that everyone turns up, knowing their parts really well, and then it's just getting back used to playing together. And we did that before Earn came out. We met in San Francisco. That was the first show of that world tour. And we just met 3 days early, and that worked really well. And then that's really the only time we rehearse, because then when we're touring quite a lot, which we will be ongoing again now, if we want to work on new songs or bring a different song into the set, we normally just do that at sound check or on days off and things like that. So thankfully we already had those days planned, because obviously with James coming on, it's been a huge thing and a big help to be able to have that time. Australia the border was closed for a couple of years, and where we live in Melbourne, Australia, was actually the most locked down city in the entire world. So we had just months and months of lockdowns, and the timing of our album was such that we were recording it in March 2020. Now, everyone knows what happened in March 2020, historically speaking, and so at that point we had written all of the songs, but not everything was totally done. So when the pandemic hit, Dan, because Dan still recorded drums on the record, he was just coming back from Nashville, USA, where he had recorded drums, and then Benji and Martino, and then also our producer Mark Lewis, were all supposed to come to Australia the following week. And Tino was the first one who kind of wasn't able to come. He actually woke up like 5 a.m. on the day he's supposed to fly to Australia to an urgent message from me saying, call me as soon as you wake up, because the Australian government had just announced while he was asleep that they were closing the border to anyone coming from Italy. And so literally by a few hours he missed out on coming to Australia, and then the same with Benji and our producer Mark Lewis. So the whole album got shut down. So instead of everyone recording the rest of the record in March, April, it got recorded in about 9 different studios in 4 different countries across 2.5 years, because of all of the delays and things getting shut down. So most of the writing happened before the pandemic, but the recording was very, very slow. Having said that, some of my violin and vocal parts got written later. I was maybe 3/4 of the way through writing. Same with lyrics. Zen was part of the way through but not finished. So some songs like Graal, the strings and the violins at the end of that song, I wrote about a year later in 2021. The track Anhedonia, the closing track on the record, I wrote that about maybe March, April 2021. After not looking at the songs for a year. The pandemic shut everything down and it just got put off to the side as kind of not possible to be finished. And then when we came back to it, it was kind of an unusual experience to have a year off those songs and then come back and revisit them and make some adjustments to the stuff that I was doing.
Yeah, so this basically was also the first time that you played them together as a band, right?
Yes. Yeah, 2 days ago.
Yeah.
Which takes a lot of faith that people turn up knowing their stuff, but it really hasn't taken that long to come together, because if everyone plays their parts, great, and then it's just getting that vibe as a unit. But it's been wonderful to see how quickly it's been coming together. So it's going to be a lot of fun. It is really hard with the new album to pick individual songs. One of the things we've noticed with the fan reaction to this record is there's a lot of disagreement on what's the best song on the record, and that's awesome, because it shows that the standard is really consistent along the record, and then people pick then more stylistically, I guess, what they like. I really love every song on the new record. The one that is the most different is Misericord, especially Misericord Part 2. And, I kind of really pushed into some areas that we'd never done, like compositionally as a band, in writing that one. And so just being able to kind of play that with the guys and bring the big epic build-up that we have over the last 4 or 5 minutes of that and bring that to life in a rehearsal room has been a lot of fun. So that's going to be really great to play. And we are doing that one in full, the full 17 minutes on this tour, which is really exciting. But really everything that we play off the new record, I'm super excited about. Funnily enough, So credit to this is basically the combination of the well, it's the relationship between ourselves and Mark Lewis, who's mixed and mastered and produced Exul, and he mixed and mastered Earn. When we did Earn, I flew to Florida to mix the album with him, and what happened a few times is I was saying I want it to be like this, and he was saying, well, if you want it to be like that, you probably should have recorded it like this. And so we learnt a lot from that, because we were trying to create sounds that we hadn't done before, and we were trying to make it heavier, because what we found with, say, Citadel, for example, our second album, was that a lot of people would come to the live shows, having loved the record, they would come to live shows, and they'd be surprised how heavy the band sounded live. Because the production on Citadel, it's really clear, but it's not super heavy. Like, the guitars don't sound that heavy. And so that was one of the things why we kind of engaged Mark Lewis to work with him. And Earn was really a step in the direction that we wanted to go, making the guitars and the drums a bit of a heavier sound. But there was the limitations because we recorded it separately. So with this album, Mark Lewis was supposed to come to Australia, and even though that fell through because of the pandemic, we still involved him in every aspect of the recording process. So, when I'm recording vocals, we're doing a certain section on 5 different mics and sending them to him to see what he thinks works best. And when Martino's recording bass in Italy, he's sitting there on the morning of recording and, going through a few different settings and, sending them like live to Mark Lewis to check and go back and get some feedback before they start. So what that meant was that the album was recorded in a way that naturally fit together better. And funnily enough, that means that because everything fits together better, the album makes more sense as far as the roles in the mix. And compositionally, it's a bit clearer to what we're trying to do. But at the same time, it's actually heavier as well. I think the guitars sound heavier than the other records. The drums sound bigger, but it's also clearer in regards to being like more easily digestible. So from that perspective, I think it's just a better production. And that's really the product of, 4th album. We keep learning each record, and we keep learning more about what we want and how to write and how to record, and then also how to communicate what we want the mixes to sound like. And it's also that second go around with Mark Lewis of going, okay, this is what we tried to do. If we want to do that this time, this is what we can do. And man, like the amount of time Mark Lewis and I spent going back and forth on mixed notes for that, like his dedication to bringing our vision to life is really the reason why it then came to fruition in the way that it has. You can produce an album in a bunch of different ways, and it creates a different vibe of the song. So I think the best example is Citadel, where like the studio versions and the live versions, they sound a bit different with the energy sometimes. It's not better or worse, but it's more, we thought it would be good to have them match as closely as we can, because we love the live shows, and we've always prided ourselves on being a great live band, like as the first and foremost thing. We played live for a number of years before we even recorded any album. And so I think that just trying to join those so that the energy matches as best as we can is really what brought about that desire. So it's not necessarily that anything about being good or bad, because like the production on Citadel is technically incredible, and that was with Jens Bogren, who's one of my favorite producers. It was more about going, oh, well, this is how it sounds live. When we play in the room, this is how this song feels. What can we change about the tones we're using, or even what we're doing with our instruments, or what we're doing in the recording and mixing, mastering, all those different elements to make them match as best as we can. There are like specific techniques that I use that make me sound like me as a violinist, and the way I play violin is actually quite unusual. What I kind of worked out, because my background is as a classical violinist, and what I worked out over time was that, I did years of classical music study, like 20 years. That's what I studied at university. But I also, from late teenage years, I started playing a lot of jazz, and so I started developing the ability to expand my technique and challenge myself to explore different areas on the instrument, which is something a lot of violinists don't do. And then also playing a bit of folk music and things like that. Not a lot of that, but a little bit. And then just exploring some different sounds. And so then when we came into this band and writing, a lot of my influences were then, you know, I wanted to be like Jeff Loomis or John Petrucci or Benjamin Barre, you know, these guys playing these great leads on guitar. I was like, oh, I kind of want to do that on the violin. There's not a lot of violinists trying to do that on the violin, you know, and it's not about a better or worse. There's incredible violinists going around doing things. But I guess in the metal world, what you get mostly, like I would say a majority of violinists playing in metal are probably more coming from a folk point of view, where it's brought into folk metal stuff, and that sounds amazing, but it's totally different. And every now and then, if I see in a review or something like that the word folk for us, I always feel like it's just that they've seen that we have a violinist and they've automatically gone and thrown in the word like folk, but we really don't have much folk influence in our sound at all. It's much more, you know, coming from this experimental and progressive elements. And so, but now, like when I pick up my violin, this is just how I play. And it's this combination of classical and jazz and trying to copy metal and rock, and it just ends up sounding like me without trying any more. One of the techniques I use a lot, which is not that common, is it's a like a combination of like a Ponticello bowing technique, which is where you play like over the bridge. But I can kind of turn it into something that kind of mimics a guitar squeal, and all these different elements. And so it's that horizontal movement of bringing the bow in and out away from the bridge to create noise in the sound, but then also with my left hand sometimes releasing the pressure of my fingers in my left hand to obscure the purity of the note. So if I push the note down fully, I'm getting the pure original note, and the same if I have my bow in the normal position. But if I bring my bow into the bridge, I'm going to create a little bit of like noise, like white noise kind of mixed into the tone. But then also if I lift to kind of bring harmonic pressure, and if I vary that like within a note, so if I'm changing that within a note, that's where I can create these different types of sounds that are quite unusual for violinists. And some of them, to be honest, some of the things that I've done, there's not a lot of violinists that I've heard do them, but sometimes you even hear them in things like bluegrass or something like that, which is not something that I really play. But I'm like, oh wow, that's cool. That's kind of like what I do, but in bluegrass. So there's like little snippets and stuff like that, but I guess that's a bit of a indication of just my musical experience is very, very broad. And so I've kind of just absorbed little bits from a lot of places. Myself individually, I'm actually a very political person. You know, my dad was a politician when I was a kid back in Australia, in the federal government there back in the 80s. And so, you know, I was always kind of brought up that, you know, things like, you know, social justice causes and, you know, society looking after everybody, not just the people with money and stuff like that, is a really important part of how society is run. So from my perspective, that's always been really important to me. But the thing is, like, Ne Obliviscaris is a collective of 6 people, and we're all really different, which is one of the reasons why the music is so interesting, I think. But because it's had this kind of, I guess, bands that are often highly political, is often where everyone's really exactly thinking the same thing, and it's something that's really important to them. Whereas I guess for us, it's always just been more about the art and the music. But for this, I mean, this was really Zen's doing. I remember joking with him like, "Oh, I'm getting asked political questions now because of you, so you can't, so no one can complain if we start talking about it." Not that they would, but just you know, being playful with each other. But it's interesting because the way the music and the lyrics meld, right, is that Zen does all the lyrics and he brings them to the band, but not as like, is this okay? Really, it's more like, this is what I have in mind. And him and I work a bit on the lyrics related to my vocals, because I wrote all my vocal melodies, and him and I work together on some of his parts sometimes, but he basically then writes the lyrics to match to that. And he's obviously working on lyrical ideas through the whole process of us writing. But the first we will hear of any lyrical themes, the songs are pretty much done. So Equus, the song was completely written start to finish before we knew what the song was about per se or any lyrics. So it's funny because sometimes people will go like, oh, is this part in this song related to this part of the lyrics? It's like, well, no, actually, because the song was done. And then, you know, Zen feels like, what does this song inspire in him? And then he brings that in. And that's one of those beautiful things about the way we run Ne Obliviscaris within like the collective that we have, that everyone's good at different things and everyone has their roles and they come together to create the music that we have. We are going to the US in October, November, which is really exciting. So we're doing a headline tour there as well after this 5-week European headline tour, which starts tomorrow. We're working on an Australian tour. We're working on that'll be for this year, but it's not announced yet. We are working on tours through Latin America, through Asia. They're probably maybe first half of next year. We really just want to get everywhere. It's been forever since we've played shows, so everywhere we've ever been before, and some places that we haven't, like going through like South America and stuff like that. We're really trying to make all of that happen as best as we can, so that we can just share these songs. We really believe in this album a lot. You know, it's definitely my favorite album that we've done, and just in all of the elements, you know, from the performances and the songwriting and the recording and the production, just kind of feels like finally everything really came together, which is really exciting. So we want to get on the road and share it with people. So that's really the plan. The plan is just to go as many places as we can and share this music with people in person and feel that energy like in the live environment. Everything, I guess, we're always trying to just step things up more and more, even just with the amount of time and effort we take to, you know, with stuff like guitar tones or trying to bring to life some of the more complicated songs like Misericord 2 I mentioned. You know, there's a lot of strings on there. I can't play all of them. So trying to work out, okay, well, how do we do that in a way where we have backing tracks to bring some of that stuff to life, and which parts am I doing? And most of that I kind of already knew when writing, but make sure that's done in a way that really brings the song to life in a really authentic way with each show. And then just, you know, I mean, there's a bigger investment in lighting, and, you know, we're using like a time code for the lighting. So we have like a fully programmed show, which we've only done once before on an Australian tour. We haven't done that here in Europe. And just things like that, you know, it's always exploring all the different elements and trying to bring them out. But to be honest, I think the most important thing of the live show, and the thing that I think is what we're best at, is simply just playing, like each person playing the parts really, really well, with great energy, and connecting that with the audience. Oh, I guess, like, thank you for everyone for being patient and sticking around, because, you know, it took us 5.5 years from Earn to get this album out. It wasn't the plan, and so we were really just blown away by, as soon as Equus came out, there was this enormous wave of energy and support. It was like all these people coming out of the woodworks remembering us, and all these new people as well that had never heard us before. And that was really heartening, because when you don't do anything for a few years, there's always this little worry that, you know, do people move on to other bands or whatever?
I don't think it works like that, but
it does sometimes. It does with pop stuff. You know, there's flavor of the moment, and then people move on sometimes, and some genres are more like that than others. But I think it's a great testament to the metal scene that, especially when you're not part of any trend, like we don't connect with any scene really. You know, people call us like, you know, progressive, but we're not really part of the progressive scene, because the progressive scene thinks we're too extreme. So we just, you know, we do our own things, and we tour with bands that we really like, and you know, just really grateful for the support that we've had from everyone, and come to a show, because we'll do our best to make it worth your while.